I saw this girl in the garbage dump. What she revealed made the Hell's Angel froze. The Montana sun cast long shadows across Crossroads salvage yard as Marcus Bear Dalton guided his weathered Harley through the rusty gates. 40 years had carved deep lines into his face, and his once black beard now matched the gray Montana sky. The bike's engine growled to silence, leaving only the whisper of prairie wind through tall grass. Ray Carlson stood in the doorway of his office, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. His eyes crinkled with recognition, though he didn't smile. "Well, look what the wind blew in." Marcus dismounted slowly, his joints protesting the long ride. "Ray." His voice was rough from disuse, like gravel under boots. "Figured you'd show up eventually," Ray said, tossing the rag onto a nearby workbench. "World ain't that big, even for someone trying to get lost in it." The junkyard stretched out behind them, a maze of stacked cars, twisted metal, and forgotten machines. Marcus studied the familiar sight, remembering summer days spent here as a teenager, before the patches, before the brotherhood that had cost him everything. "Need work?" Ray asked, breaking the silence. Marcus nodded once. "If you're offering. Got plenty of scrap needs sorting, bikes too." Ray gestured to a corner of the yard where several motorcycles lay in various states of repair. "Shop's got a cot in back. It ain't much, but it's dry." "Appreciate it." Marcus shouldered his worn leather saddlebag, the weight of 4 decades of running heavy on his back. They settled into an easy routine through the afternoon. Marcus worked methodically on a stripped-down Triumph, his big hands still remembering every trick and tool. Ray brought him water and left him alone, knowing better than to push. As evening painted the sky purple, Marcus sat on an overturned milk crate, cleaning parts in solvent. The quiet felt right, easier than words, easier than memories. But peace never lasted long in his world. A sound caught his attention, metal shifting against metal, followed by the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. Marcus set down his work and listened. The noise came from the dump behind the yard, where Ray let folks leave their unwanted junk. Standing slowly, Marcus moved toward the chain-link fence separating the yard from the dump. His boots made no sound on the packed earth. Old habits died hard. The security light caught movement in the shadows between trash heaps. A figure darted between piles of discarded furniture and appliances. Small, quick, definitely not a scavenger looking for copper wire or car parts. Marcus glimpsed a flash of purple fabric, heard the scuff of tennis shoes. He rounded a mountain of crushed washing machines just in time to see a teenage girl disappear into the growing darkness. Her hoodie was too thin for the cooling evening, and she moved like someone used to not being seen. The girl vanished into the maze of garbage, leaving Marcus standing alone among the cast-offs and broken things. Something about her desperate flight stirred memories he'd rather keep buried, of another girl, lost long ago in the night. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the junkyard, turning mountains of twisted metal into dark shapes against the pale Montana sky. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes, his boots crunching on gravel as he made his morning rounds. The events from last night still bothered him, that fleeting shadow of a girl disappearing into the darkness. Then he saw her. She was perched on a rusted tire, like a small bird ready to take flight, her oversized hoodie hanging in tatters around her thin frame. Dirt streaked her face, and her hair fell in unwashed tangles past her shoulders. Her eyes, though, they held something that made Marcus's chest tighten. They were too old for such a young face, carrying the same haunted look he saw in his own mirror every morning. Marcus slowed his approach, not wanting to startle her. He'd seen enough scared animals in his time to know better. The girl watched him with wary eyes but didn't bolt. That was something. "Ain't safe out here alone?" he said gruffly, keeping his voice low and steady. His weathered hands dug into the pocket of his leather jacket, pulling out a wrapped granola bar he'd meant for his lunch. "Here." He held it out, arm extended but not moving closer. The girl stared at the offering for a long moment, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edges of her sleeves. "Got some water, too," Marcus added, slowly reaching for the bottle at his belt. He set both items halfway between them on an old oil drum, then took 2 steps back. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band ready to snap. Finally, the girl's hand darted out, snatching the granola bar. She didn't open it, just clutched it tight against her chest. Marcus leaned against a stack of crushed cars, trying to appear casual despite the concern gnawing at his gut. "Got a name?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the ground, her voice barely a whisper when she finally spoke. "I saw this girl in the garbage dump." The word sent an unexpected chill down Marcus's spine. "What girl?" Her eyes lifted to meet his, and something in them made his breath catch. "She was me." The words hung in the crisp morning air. Marcus felt the familiar weight of other people's pain settle on his shoulders, a weight he'd been carrying since leaving the Angels, since losing everything that mattered. Before he could respond, the girl slid off the tire. Her movements were quick but unsteady, like a wounded animal. As she turned to go, something fell from beneath her hoodie. A small stuffed bear, worn and dirty. It landed in the gravel with a soft thud, one of its paws partially blackened as if it had been burned. Marcus stared at the abandoned toy, his heart hammering against his ribs. By the time he looked up, the girl had vanished into the maze of junked cars and twisted metal, leaving only questions in her wake. He reached down to pick up the bear, his calloused fingers gentle against its matted fur. The sight of that burned paw stirred something in his memory, something he'd spent 40 years trying to forget. Marcus's hands trembled as he turned the small teddy bear over in his weathered palms. The fur was matted and gray with age, nothing like the soft brown it must have been originally. One eye was missing, and stuffing poked through worn seams. But none of that mattered compared to what he found on its left paw. His throat went dry. There, carefully sewn into the fabric with faded red thread, was a symbol he hadn't seen in 40 years. 2 interlocked circles with a small cross, the exact design he'd once tattooed on himself and his girlfriend Sarah. It had been their secret mark, their promise to each other and their baby girl. He sank onto an old car seat, his legs suddenly weak. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The night Sarah disappeared with their infant daughter Hannah, the roar of motorcycles in the distance, the empty crib. That bear had been in Hannah's tiny arms when they vanished. Sleep didn't come that night. Marcus paced the garage, checking his watch every few minutes until dawn broke over the junkyard. When the girl finally appeared, picking her way through the maze of crushed cars, he was waiting. "That bear," he said, holding it up. "Where did you find it?" She froze like a spooked deer, ready to bolt, but something in his voice must have convinced her to stay. "In an old locker," she answered softly. "Under a pile of garbage way in the back." Her eyes darted between Marcus and the bear. "Are you going to take it?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but I need to know more. Please." She edged closer, drawn perhaps by the gentle tone he hadn't used in decades. "I'm Lacey," she said. "I found it about 3 weeks ago when I was—" She hesitated, looking ashamed. "When I was looking for stuff to sell?" "You're living in foster care?" Marcus asked, remembering Ray mentioning something about a group home on the edge of town. Lacey nodded, pulling her threadbare hoodie tighter. Yeah, but I come here a lot. It's quiet. Nobody bothers me here. She gestured at the towering piles of scrap. Sometimes it feels more like home than anywhere else. Marcus's chest ached at her words. He knew that feeling, of belonging nowhere, of finding comfort in forgotten places and broken things. The bear, he pressed gently. Was there anything else with it? Just the locker. It was pretty rusted shut. Took me forever to get it open. She scuffed her shoe in the dirt. Why is it so important to you? Marcus stood carefully, trying not to spook her. I need to show this to someone. Will you wait here? After Lacey nodded, he hurried across the yard to Ray's office. His old friend was sorting invoices, coffee cup in hand. Ray, Marcus's voice was hoarse. Look at this. Ray set down his coffee, taking the bear. His eyes widened as he examined the paw. Good Lord, Bear, is this... Hannah's, the one Sarah made for her. Marcus gripped the edge of Ray's desk. The symbol, you remember it? Course I do. You showed it to me the day you tattooed it on yourself. Ray turned the bear over carefully. This is definitely Sarah's needlework. I'd recognize those tiny stitches anywhere. He looked up at Marcus, face grave. Where did you find it? That girl out there, Lacey. She found it here, in the dump. Marcus's voice cracked. After 40 years, Ray. After 40 years, my daughter's bear shows up in your junkyard. Marcus sat alone on the hood of a rusted-out Chevy, staring up at the Montana stars. The night was clear and cold, just like that night 40 years ago. His calloused fingers traced the outline of the teddy bear's paw, feeling the raised threads of the hidden tattoo beneath. The memories came flooding back, sharp and painful as broken glass. He could still hear the screech of tires, the thundering of motorcycles, the chaos of that raid gone terribly wrong. His girlfriend Sarah had begged him not to go that night, clutching baby Hannah to her chest. But he hadn't listened. Should have been there to protect you both, he whispered to the stars, his voice rough with regret. The next morning, Lacey appeared at the junkyard again, perched on her usual tire. Marcus noticed dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept well. He handed her a breakfast sandwich from the gas station. Got something to tell you about this bear, he said, settling onto a stack of flattened oil drums nearby. Might help explain why it was here. Lacey took small, careful bites of her sandwich, watching him with those sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. Back in '83, I was running with a bad crowd, Marcus began, choosing his words carefully. We hit a warehouse that night. Things went wrong, real wrong. When I got home... He paused, the words sticking in his throat. My girlfriend and my baby girl were gone. Just vanished. Lacey's hand froze halfway to her mouth. What was the baby's name? She asked quietly. Hannah, Marcus said, the name still tender after all these years. She was only 6 months old. Lacey set down her sandwich, suddenly very still. Was there a red motorcycle? Marcus felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Yeah, how'd you know that? I don't know, Lacey said, wrapping her arms around herself. It just felt right. Was it raining? Like a flood, Marcus confirmed, studying her face. Sarah, that's my girlfriend. She left a note saying she had to protect Hannah. That's the last I ever heard from them. Did the woman have long, dark hair? Lacey asked, her voice distant, like she was trying to remember something from very far away. And she was crying? Marcus stood up so quickly he knocked over an empty paint can. How could you know that? Lacey shrugged, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Sometimes I have these dreams. There's a woman crying and a baby screaming. And there's always this motorcycle in the dark, getting smaller and smaller until it disappears." The sun was getting low as they walked toward Lacey's group home, neither of them speaking much. Marcus's mind was racing, trying to make sense of what Lacey had said. How could she dream about things that happened before she was born? "Thanks for the sandwich," Lacey said as they reached the corner of Pine Street. "And for telling me about Hannah." She hesitated, scuffing her worn sneaker against the sidewalk. "Those dreams, they've always felt more like memories than dreams. Weird, right?" Marcus watched her disappear through the group home's front door, his heart pounding with questions he was afraid to ask. The morning sun cast long shadows across the junkyard as Marcus tinkered with an old Harley engine. The familiar smell of oil and metal helped steady his nerves after another sleepless night. The sound of footsteps on gravel made him look up. Lacey stood there, her oversized hoodie pulled tight against the morning chill. Dark circles under her eyes told him she hadn't slept much either. "They're getting stronger," she said without preamble, settling onto an upturned milk crate. "The dreams, I mean." Marcus set down his wrench, giving her his full attention. His weathered hands, stained with grease, gripped his knees. "Tell me." "Last night I saw a woman." Lacey's voice trembled. She was crying in a bathroom somewhere, looking in the mirror and saying she was sorry. She pulled her sleeves over her hands. She kept saying, "Hannah," over and over. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "Hannah? That's my mom's name." Lacey picked at a loose thread on her jeans. "She left me when I was little. The social workers say she couldn't take care of me anymore." The old biker's heart pounded. He stood up slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Your mother's name is Hannah?" Lacey nodded. "Hannah Taylor. But I haven't seen her in forever." She hugged herself tighter. "Sometimes I think these dreams are memories, but they can't be. They feel old, like from before I was born." Marcus walked to his workbench, his legs unsteady. He pulled out an old leather notebook and began writing. "When's your birthday, kid?" "December 12th, 2007. His hand shook as he wrote. The timing fit. If Hannah had been pregnant at 16, he needed to know more. "I'm going to make some calls," Marcus said, reaching for his cell phone. "Got an old friend who works at social services. Maybe she can help us understand what's going on." For the next few hours, Marcus made call after call, writing down names and dates while Lacey wandered the junkyard. His old contact, Sarah, promised to look into the records, but warned him it would take time. Late afternoon found them both digging through a newly discovered locker Lacey had spotted, half buried under some scrap metal. The teen seemed drawn to it, like a magnet to steel. "There's something here," Lacey mumbled, reaching deep into the rusty container. "I can feel it." Her hand emerged clutching a plastic bag. Inside was a photograph, its edges charred and curled. Marcus wiped decades of grime from the surface with trembling fingers. The image showed a young woman with long, dark hair and sad eyes, holding a baby. Though faded and damaged, her face was unmistakable. It was the same face that had haunted his dreams for 40 years. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "That's her." His finger traced the outline of the woman's face. "That's my Hannah." Marcus stood in front of the brick town hall building, his weathered hands fidgeting with his leather jacket zipper. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps as he took a deep breath and walked inside. The familiar face of Linda Martinez, now gray-haired but still manning the records desk after all these years, looked up at him with surprise. Marcus Dalton? Is that really you? He managed a small nod. Linda, need a favor. She glanced around the empty office and leaned forward. You know I shouldn't, but for old time's sake, what are you looking for? Foster care records. Girl named Lacey Taylor. Linda's fingers flew across her keyboard. That's sensitive information, Marcus. Why do you need it? Marcus pulled out the old teddy bear from his jacket, showing her the sewn-in tattoo. Because I think she's my granddaughter. Linda's eyes widened as she recognized the symbol. Everyone in town knew the story of Marcus's missing baby. Without another word, she printed several documents and slid them across the desk. In the fluorescent light of the records room, Marcus's hands trembled as he read through Lacey's file. Each page felt heavier than the last. Birth certificate. Mother listed as Hannah Taylor. No father listed. A string of foster homes starting 5 years ago. Previous address in Millbrook, the next town over. But it was the social worker's notes that made his throat tight. Mother, Hannah Taylor, surrendered custody while seeking addiction treatment. Exhibits severe trauma responses. Claims she's been running from someone. Multiple attempts at rehabilitation unsuccessful. Last known whereabouts, Hope Street Shelter, Millbrook. Marcus closed the file, his chest aching. The pieces were falling into place. Hannah, his stolen daughter, had spent years running, finally falling into addiction. And Lacey, this broken, beautiful girl who spoke in riddles and lived among discarded things, was carrying the weight of all that pain. He found Lacey in her usual spot at the dump, perched on the rusted tire, drawing in a worn sketchbook. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and shadow. Your mother's name is Hannah, he said quietly, sitting down beside her. Lacey's pencil stopped moving. How do you know that? Because... Marcus pulled out, the teddy bear again, holding it gently. Because Hannah is my daughter. She was stolen from me when she was just a baby. And that makes you... His voice cracked. That makes you my granddaughter. Lacey stared at the bear, then at Marcus, her face a storm of emotions. Her hands started shaking so bad she dropped her sketchbook. Pages of drawings scattered across the dirt, pictures of motorcycles, of crying women, of teddy bears with burned paws. No, she whispered, backing away. No, that's not... I can't be... Lacey, wait! But she was already running, her tattered hoodie disappearing into the maze of junked cars and twisted metal. Marcus stood, wanting to follow, but knowing she needed space. He bent down and gathered her scattered drawings, each one a piece of the story she'd been trying to tell all along. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the garbage dump. Marcus sat back down on the tire, holding Lacey's sketchbook and the teddy bear that had started it all, waiting for her to return when she was ready. Marcus found Lacey exactly where he expected, curled up behind a stack of crushed cars in the junkyard. The moon cast long shadows through the twisted metal, making the place look like a graveyard of mechanical bones. She sat with her knees pulled tight to her chest, her hoodie drawn close around her face. He approached slowly, his boots crunching on scattered bits of gravel. Mind if I join you? His gruff voice was softer than usual. Lacey shrugged, which Marcus had learned was as close to a yes as he was likely to get. He lowered himself onto an old tire beside her, his joints creaking nearly as much as the rubber beneath him. For a long while, they just sat there, listening to the crickets and distant highway sounds. The night air was cool, carrying the familiar sense of oil and rust that had become oddly comforting to them both. I wasn't always like this, Marcus finally said, breaking the silence. Hiding out in a junkyard, fixing broken things. He pulled out his wallet and retrieved a worn photograph. This was me back then. Lacey leaned in slightly to look. The picture showed a younger Marcus on a gleaming motorcycle, his leather vest adorned with patches, his face fierce and proud. I thought the angels were my family, he continued, his voice heavy with memory. We had a code, or at least I thought we did. But then things went wrong. Really wrong. He rubbed his weathered hands together. There was a raid that wasn't supposed to turn violent. But it did. Lacey remained silent, but Marcus could tell she was listening intently. Your grandmother. She saw something that night she wasn't supposed to see. She tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. I was too loyal to the wrong people. His voice cracked slightly. Next thing I knew, she was gone. Took Hannah, your mother, with her. I searched everywhere, gave up everything to find them. He pulled out another photo. This one of a baby girl with bright eyes. This was Hannah, just before they disappeared. She had the bear then, the one you found. Lacey's fingers brushed against the teddy bear she now kept in her hoodie pocket. How long did you look for them? Never really stopped, Marcus admitted. Left the angels, traveled from town to town, following leads that went nowhere. Sometimes I'd hear whispers about a woman and a little girl, but they'd always vanish before I got there. He sighed deeply. Eventually, the trail went cold. Lacey uncurled slightly, her rigid posture softening. Is that why you stay here now, in case they come back? Marcus nodded. Partly. Also because sometimes the things others throw away, they're the ones most worth saving. He gave her a meaningful look. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, avoiding his gaze but inching closer. My mom, Hannah, she used to say something like that. Before she... Lacey's voice trailed off. Before she had to leave you, Marcus finished gently. She was trying to protect you, just like her mother tried to protect her. Tears welled in Lacey's eyes, but she brushed them away quickly. If I am your granddaughter, she said softly, what does that make us now? Marcus turned to face her fully, his eyes bright in the moonlight. It makes us a family worth fighting for. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair at the social services office. His leather jacket creaked as he leaned forward, addressing the skeptical-looking woman behind the desk. I know it's unusual, he said, his gruff voice softer than usual. But she needs a stable place right now, at least while we look for her mother, for Hannah. The social worker, Mrs. Peterson, peered at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Dalton, while I appreciate your concern, we can't just place a minor with someone because they claim to be related. I ain't claiming nothing without proof, Marcus replied, pulling out the teddy bear from his jacket. This bear belonged to my daughter. It's got our family marking. Lacey found it in that dump, and she's been having dreams, memories that ain't hers. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he set the bear on the desk. Ray stepped forward from where he'd been quietly standing by the door. I've known Marcus for 40 years, ma'am. He's rough around the edges, sure, but he's a good man. I own the property where he stays, and I can provide supervision. Mrs. Peterson examined the bear carefully, then looked through the paperwork on her desk. The girl has been in and out of foster homes. She's difficult to place. She paused, studying Marcus's face. But she seems to trust you, which is rare for her. She's family, Marcus said simply, even if we're still proving it. After what felt like hours of questions, paperwork, and phone calls, Mrs. Peterson finally nodded. We'll allow a temporary placement. 2 weeks with daily check-ins. Mr. Carlson will need to be present as a supervisor and will conduct random IF visits. Ray's garage apartment wasn't much, but Marcus had spent the afternoon cleaning it frantically. He'd scrubbed the small spare room until his hands were raw, put fresh sheets on the bed, and even bought a small lamp from the dollar store. When they brought Lacey to the garage, her few belongings in a worn backpack, she stood in the doorway of her room, silent. Marcus watched her face anxiously. "It ain't much," he said gruffly, "but it's warm. Safe." Lacey ran her hand along the clean sheets, then looked at the lamp. "It's nice," she said quietly. "Really nice." Later that evening, Marcus stood in the tiny kitchen area, trying to remember how to make dinner. Ray had helped him stock the refrigerator, but cooking wasn't his strong suit. He settled on grilled cheese sandwiches and canned tomato soup, something his own mother used to make. The bread sizzled in the pan as Lacey watched from her perch on a wooden stool. She'd showered and changed into clean clothes, her wet hair making dark spots on her t-shirt. "You're burning it," she observed. Marcus flipped the sandwich quickly, revealing a slightly blackened side. "Adds character," he muttered. A small sound escaped Lacey, something between a snort and a giggle. Marcus looked up, surprised, and found himself chuckling too. Soon they were both laughing, him at his culinary disaster, her at his attempts to salvage the charred sandwich. It was awkward and halting, like neither of them quite remembered how to do it properly, but it was real. They sat at the small table, eating slightly burnt grilled cheese and soup from mismatched bowls. The laughter had faded to comfortable silence, but something had shifted. For the first time in decades, the garage felt less like a place to hide and more like a home. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the garage as Marcus pulled out his toolbox. Lacey stood nearby, her hands stuffed in the pockets of an oversized hoodie, watching him intently. A beaten-up Harley sat between them, its engine exposed like an open heart. "First rule of mechanics," Marcus said, his voice gruff but gentle. "Every machine has a story to tell. You just gotta learn how to listen." Lacey nodded, stepping closer. Her eyes focused on the complex maze of metal and wire before her. Marcus handed her a wrench, showing her how to hold it properly. "See this timing chain? It's like a heartbeat. When it's off, nothing works right." He guided her hands, showing her how to adjust it. To his surprise, Lacey's fingers moved with natural grace, as if she'd done this before. "I can feel it," she murmured, her face lighting up. "It's like everything's connected." Over the next few hours, Marcus watched in amazement as Lacey absorbed every detail he shared. She asked smart questions, remembered every tool's name, and showed an uncanny knack for spotting problems. "You got oil in your veins, kid," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "Just like—" He stopped himself, but Lacey finished the thought. "Like Hannah?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, just like her." Days turned into weeks, and their routine became comfortable. Each morning they'd work on bikes together, Marcus teaching and Lacey learning. She started calling him Bear, at first hesitantly, then with growing affection. "Hey, Bear," she'd say, poking her head into the garage. "That carburetor giving you trouble again?" The nickname, once a reminder of his outlaw past, took on new meaning coming from her. It became something warm, something that felt like family. One afternoon, while they were taking a break, Lacey sat cross-legged on an old milk crate, sketching in a worn notebook she carried everywhere. Marcus pretended not to notice, but he caught glimpses of her concentrated expression as her pencil moved across the paper. That evening, after they'd finished their work and cleaned up, Lacey approached Marcus as he sat in his old leather chair. She held something behind her back, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I made something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She thrust a piece of paper toward him, then quickly stepped back. Marcus took the paper with careful hands. On it was a detailed drawing of the teddy bear, the one with the hidden tattoo that had brought them together. Every stitch, every worn patch was captured with loving detail. The bear seemed almost alive on the page, its button eyes somehow holding all the sadness and hope they'd shared. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the paper over. There, in small, careful letters, was written a single word with a question mark. "Grandpa?" Marcus felt something break inside him, not in a painful way, but like ice cracking in spring. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision. He tried to speak, but no words came. Lacey stood perfectly still, watching him with worried eyes. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of loneliness and loss, but also with the promise of something new. A tear rolled down Marcus's weathered cheek and landed on the drawing. He quickly wiped it away, careful not to smudge the pencil marks that meant more to him than any treasure ever could. The old Harley rumbled down Main Street of Hope's Landing, a small town 30 miles from the junkyard. Lacey sat behind Marcus, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. Her purple hoodie fluttered in the wind as they passed weathered storefronts and quiet neighborhoods. "You nervous?" Marcus asked over his shoulder as they slowed at a stoplight. "A little," Lacey admitted, her voice barely audible over the engine. "What if she doesn't want to be found?" Marcus's heart squeezed. He'd asked himself the same question 1,000 times. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, kiddo." They pulled into the parking lot of Hope Community Church, a modest brick building with a hand-painted welcome sign. White flowers bloomed in wooden planters near the entrance, and a small bell tower reached toward the cloudy Montana sky. Marcus helped Lacey off the bike, noticing how her hands trembled slightly. He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We'll do this together, okay?" Inside, they found Pastor Elroy Jennings organizing donated clothes in the church basement. He was a tall man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, wearing a worn denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "What can I do for you folks?" he asked, setting down a box of winter coats. Marcus cleared his throat. "We're looking for someone. Hannah Taylor. She might have come through here a few years back." The pastor's expression shifted, recognition flickering across his face. "Hannah," he said softly. "Yes, I remember her well." Lacey stepped forward, her voice small but determined. "You knew my mom?" Pastor Jennings pulled up 3 folding chairs, gesturing for them to sit. The basement smelled of old books and coffee, and somewhere above them, the church's heating system hummed steadily. "She came to us about 5 years ago," he explained, his voice gentle. "A broken woman, but with such a fierce spirit underneath all that pain. She was fighting hard to get clean, to make something of herself." Marcus leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "How long was she here?" "Almost 8 months. She helped in our soup kitchen, worked with other women trying to recover." The pastor's eyes grew distant with memory. "She had nightmares, though. Would wake up crying about a baby she'd lost, a life she'd run from." Lacey wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. "Did she ever mention where she went?" Marcus asked. Pastor Jennings stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. After a moment of searching, he returned with a piece of paper. "She volunteered at the women's shelter on Oak Street, number 421. Spent a lot of time there, even after she left us." He handed Marcus the paper with the address, then looked between them thoughtfully. "She was always searching through faces in the crowd, you know, like she was looking for someone she'd lost." He paused, studying Marcus's face. Or maybe someone was looking for her. Marcus's hands trembled as he folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket pocket. This was the closest they'd been to Hannah in decades. His daughter, Lacey's mother, the missing piece that could make their broken family whole again. "Thank you, Pastor," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given us more than you know." As they stood to leave, Pastor Jennings touched Marcus's arm. "She was looking for someone," he added softly. "Every single day she was here, she was searching." The abandoned shelter loomed before them like a tired ghost, its windows dark and empty. Marcus killed the motorcycle's engine, and the silence felt heavy in the autumn air. Beside him, Lacey hopped off the bike, her boots crunching on fallen leaves. "This is it?" she asked, pulling her hoodie tighter, against the chill. Marcus nodded, his weathered face grim. "According to the pastor's directions?" He ran a calloused hand over his gray beard, studying the building's worn facade. Paint peeled from the wooden siding like old scabs, and a broken gutter hung at an odd angle. They approached the front door, where a faded sign still read, "Hope Haven Women's Shelter." The door wasn't locked. It swung open with a plaintive creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. "Careful where you step," Marcus warned, testing each floorboard before moving forward. The place smelled of mildew and abandonment. Lacey moved like a cat through the dim space, her keen eyes taking in everything. Empty rooms held metal bed frames with bare mattresses, scattered chairs, and abandoned personal items that told silent stories of the women who'd once sought refuge here. "Look at all these pictures on the wall," Lacey said softly, pointing to a corkboard covered in faded photographs. Marcus stepped closer, his heart thumping as he searched each face for Hannah's features. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps echoing. In what must have been a common room, Lacey suddenly dropped to her knees, peering at something in the cracked tile floor. "Bear, there's something stuck down here." Her fingers worked at a gap between broken tiles. Marcus knelt beside her, ignoring the protest in his joints. After a moment of careful prying, Lacey pulled out a tarnished silver bracelet. She held it up to the light streaming through a dusty window. "LH," she read the engraving aloud. "What's that mean?" Marcus's hands trembled as he took the bracelet. "Laura Henderson," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Your grandmother's name. I gave her this bracelet when—" He swallowed hard. "When we found out she was pregnant with Hannah." Lacey's eyes widened. "You mean—" "Yeah, kid. This was your grandmother's. She must have given it to your mother." A sound at the entrance made them both turn. An older woman stood there, keys jangling in her hand. "Can I help you folks?" she asked, suspicious but not unkind. Marcus stood slowly, still holding the bracelet. "We're looking for information about someone who stayed here. Hannah Taylor?" The woman's expression softened with recognition. "Hannah? I remember her well. I worked here until they closed the place down last year." She moved closer, studying Marcus's face. "Are you family?" "I'm her father," Marcus said quietly. "This is her daughter, Lacey." The woman nodded slowly. "Hannah talked about you both. She was here for almost a year, really trying to get clean." She paused, glancing at Lacey. "She left about 5 years ago. She was pregnant again. We tried to convince her to stay, but one morning she was just gone. Never heard from her after that." Lacey's shoulders slumped, and Marcus put a protective hand on her back. The bracelet felt heavy in his other hand, a weight of memories and lost chances. "Did she say where she might go?" Marcus asked. The former staff member shook her head sadly. "No, she just vanished, like so many of them do when they're scared." She looked around the empty shelter. "This place has seen too many stories like that." The late afternoon sun slanted through the soup kitchen's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Marcus and Lacey stood in the doorway of St. Michael's Community Kitchen, taking in the familiar scent of vegetable soup and bleach that seemed common to all such places. A few volunteers bustled around, preparing for the evening meal service. Metal pots clanked against the industrial stoves, and the hum of industrial refrigerators filled the background. Marcus unconsciously touched the teddy bear in his jacket pocket, their good luck charm now. "Can I help you?" A woman with silver hair tied back in a neat bun approached them, wiping her hands on a faded floral apron. "We're looking for information about someone who used to work here," Marcus said, his gravelly voice soft. "Hannah Taylor?" The woman's face brightened with recognition. "Hannah? Oh yes, sweet girl. I'm Margaret. I worked with her for almost a year." She gestured to a small table in the corner. "Please, sit." Lacey slid into the metal folding chair, her fingers drumming nervously on the scratched tabletop. Marcus remained standing, too restless to sit. Hannah was troubled, but she had such a good heart, Margaret said, settling into a chair. She'd stay late after her shift, just talking to the folks who came in. She understood their pain, you know? Marcus swallowed hard. Did she ever talk about her past? Margaret's eyes grew distant with memory. She talked about her father quite a bit, actually. Said she had fragments of memories. A big man with a beard who used to make her laugh. She was taken from him when she was very young. Lacey's hand found Marcus's arm, squeezing gently. He covered her hand with his own, rough and weathered against her young skin. She had a daughter, too, Margaret continued. That was what hurt her the most. She'd come down to the church basement after hours. I'd find her crying, talking to this old picture she carried, some biker fellow. She'd tell the picture how sorry she was, how she wished she could make things right. Marcus turned away, hiding the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Lacey spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you know where she went? Margaret shook her head sadly. She just stopped coming one day, left her apron hanging on the hook over there. She pointed to a row of pegs on the wall. We kept hoping she'd come back. While Marcus asked Margaret more questions, Lacey wandered over to a corner where a cardboard box sat labeled Lost and Found. She began sifting through the miscellaneous items, single gloves, reading glasses, forgotten scarves. Her hand froze on something at the bottom. She pulled out a folded photograph, creased and worn at the edges from handling. As she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Bear, she called out softly. I think you need to see this. Marcus crossed the room, his boots heavy on the floor. Lacey held out the photograph with trembling fingers. It showed a younger version of Marcus, sitting astride his motorcycle, wearing his old leather vest. His beard was dark then, his face unlined by years of grief. Someone had written on the back in faded ink, Daddy, I remember. Marcus guided the old pickup into the gas station, his weathered hands steady on the wheel despite his racing heart. 3 days of searching this town had left them empty, but something kept pulling him back to this intersection. Lacey dozed in the passenger seat, her dark hair falling across her face, reminding him so much of Hannah at that age. The fuel gauge ticked upward as he leaned against the truck's rusty fender. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and the air carried the sharp bite of autumn. His eyes drifted toward the freeway exit ramp, where a small figure stood holding a cardboard sign. Something about her stance made his chest tighten. The woman wore layers of mismatched clothing, her hair hidden under a faded blue bandana. But there was a familiar grace in how she held herself, even in desperation. Marcus found himself walking closer, drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain. The woman's sign read, "Anything helps. God bless." Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. 20 feet away now. 15. His boots felt heavy on the concrete. The woman turned slightly, and Marcus's world stopped spinning. Those eyes. Hannah's eyes. The same deep brown that had looked up at him from a baby's face 40 years ago. They were older now, shadowed by pain and hardship, set in a face that was too thin, too lined for someone her age. But they were unmistakably his daughter's eyes. "Hannah," he whispered, but the word was lost in the rush of passing traffic. She hadn't noticed him yet, her gaze fixed on the stream of cars. Marcus took another step forward, his hands shaking now. How many times had he imagined this moment? How many nights had he dreamed of finding her? The morning light caught her face, and he saw more clearly the marks life had left on her. Her cheekbones were sharp under pale skin, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. A small scar curved along her jawline. But beneath the wear and damage, he saw echoes of the baby he'd lost, the child he'd searched for across decades. Marcus cleared his throat softly. "Hannah?" She turned toward his voice, confusion crossing her features. Then her eyes met his, and the cardboard sign slipped from her fingers. Recognition bloomed in her expression, followed by disbelief. Then something like terror mixed with hope. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Marcus stayed perfectly still, afraid any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. "It's me, baby girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's Dad." Hannah's hands rose to cover her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at him, taking in his gray beard, his weathered face, the leather vest he still wore out of habit. "This can't be real," she whispered. "I must be dreaming again." "I'm real, Hannah. I've been looking for you for so long." She took a small step backward, swaying slightly. Marcus resisted the urge to reach out and steady her. Her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape route, then returned to his face, unable to look away. "Dad?" The word came out as barely more than a breath, fragile as a butterfly's wing. Her whole body trembled now, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Marcus felt his own eyes growing wet as he looked at his long-lost daughter, seeing both the woman she'd become and the baby he'd lost in the same moment. After 40 years of searching, of hoping, of praying, here she was, broken but alive, damaged but standing before him. Hannah's lips trembled as she whispered again, "Dad?" The motel room felt too small for the weight of their silence. Marcus sat in a worn armchair by the window, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. Hannah perched on the edge of the bed, her thin frame seeming ready to flee at any moment. Lacey stood awkwardly between them, shifting from one foot to the other, her eyes darting between the grandfather she'd just found and the mother she'd lost. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cheap curtains, painting stripes across the faded carpet. A truck rumbled past on the highway outside, its sound filling the heavy quiet. "I never wanted to leave you, Lacey," Hannah finally whispered, her voice cracking. Her fingers twisted the hem of her oversized sweater. "Every single day without you felt like dying." Lacey's shoulders tensed. "Then why did you?" Hannah's eyes welled with tears. "Because sometimes loving someone means protecting them, even when it breaks your heart." She took a shaky breath. "After your father, after he hurt us both that last time, I knew I couldn't keep you safe anymore. Not while I was—" She swallowed hard. "Not while I was using." Marcus leaned forward, his chair creaking. "Hannah, baby girl." "I'm so sorry, Dad," Hannah choked out. I remember that night, when Mom took me and ran. I was just a baby, but somehow I always remembered your voice. Even through all the years, all the foster homes, all the bad choices, I heard you calling for me." Lacey slowly sank onto the bed, leaving space between herself and Hannah. "I heard voices too. In my dreams, a motorcycle engine, a baby crying. That was me," Hannah nodded, wiping her eyes. "I used to ride with your father on his bike, before everything went wrong. He'd drive so fast and I'd hold you so tight, thinking we could outrun our demons." Marcus's voice was gruff with emotion. "But the demons caught up." "They always did," Hannah agreed quietly. "Until I couldn't run anymore. Until the only thing left to do was give up the one thing I loved most." She looked at Lacey, her pain naked on her face. "I signed the papers to put you in foster care on your 11th birthday. I thought maybe someone else could give you the life I couldn't." Lacey's lower lip trembled. "I waited for you. At every new home, every new school, I waited." "I know, baby, I know." Hannah's hands shook as she reached out, not quite touching Lacey. "I got clean, stayed clean, started volunteering at the church, trying to help other people who were lost like me. But I never stopped looking for you, never stopped praying that somehow, someday—" Marcus cleared his throat. "Looks like someone was listening to those prayers." A small sound escaped Lacey's throat, half laugh, half sob. She inched closer to Hannah on the bed, their shoulders nearly touching. "I kept going back to that dump because sometimes the broken things are the ones that matter most." Hannah's breath hitched. Lacey hesitated for just a moment before letting her head rest against her mother's shoulder. The simple gesture seemed to break something open in the room. Hannah's arm came up around her daughter, gentle and uncertain, while tears rolled freely down her cheeks. Marcus watched his daughter and granddaughter from his chair, his own eyes swimming. Through his tears, he smiled, a real smile that reached all the way to his heart for the first time in 40 years. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm squares of light across their booth. Marcus sat with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug, watching Hannah fill out the rehab program paperwork. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately, as if each word carried the weight of her past mistakes. "You're sure about this?" Hannah looked up at Marcus, her eyes carrying that familiar mix of hope and fear he'd seen in Lacey's face so many times. "The church program is good," Marcus said softly. "Pastor Mike's helped a lot of people find their way back." Lacey sat next to Hannah, picking at her toast and occasionally leaning against her mother's shoulder. The gesture seemed unconscious, like a flower turning toward the sun after too long in shade. "I want to do this right," Hannah whispered, her voice cracking. "I want to be someone Lacey can count on." Marcus watched his daughter struggle with the forms, noticed how her hands shook less when Lacey touched her arm. The social worker had explained it would take time: adoption paperwork, proof of rehabilitation, stable housing. But for the first time in 40 years, time felt like a gift rather than a burden. "The apartment above Ray's garage," Marcus said, clearing his throat. "It needs work, but it's solid. Could fix it up while you're in the program. Make it a home." Hannah's eyes welled up. "Dad, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking." Marcus's gruff voice softened. "I'm offering. Been waiting 40 years to build something for my girl." Lacey perked up. "Can I help? I'm getting pretty good with tools now." "Sure thing, kid," Marcus smiled. "You can be the project manager." The waitress arrived with their burgers, extra pickles for Lacey, no onions for Hannah, just like they'd discovered they all preferred. It was a small thing, this shared taste, but it felt like a miracle. "I found some of my old sketches," Hannah said between bites. From before. Everything. Was thinking maybe I could take some art classes at the community center. Teach Lacey what I know. Already got your talent? Marcus nodded toward Lacey. Should see the drawings she does of the motorcycles in the yard. Really? Hannah turned to her daughter, eyes bright with interest. Bear's been letting me practice on paper from the office. Lacey ducked her head, but couldn't hide her smile. I like drawing the broken things, making them look whole again. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Then Hannah snorted, trying to catch a falling pickle, and Lacey giggled, and Marcus let out a deep chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere long buried. They laughed together, the sound mixing with the clinking of forks and the soft murmur of the diner. Three people who'd been lost to each other, now finding their way home in the simple act of sharing a meal. Marcus watched them, his daughter and granddaughter, their faces bright with something that looked like joy. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't mind. For the first time since he'd rolled back into town, the ghosts in his eyes had gone quiet. Hannah caught his gaze and reached across the table, squeezing his weathered hand. No words needed to be said. They were building something new from the wreckage of the past, one day at a time, one shared burger at a time, one quiet laugh at a time. Marcus pulled his truck into Randy's Gas and Go, the afternoon sun beating down on the cracked pavement. The familiar smell of gasoline and hot concrete brought back memories of countless stops along endless highways. He unscrewed the gas cap, his weathered hands moving with the ease of decades of routine. The peaceful moment shattered when he heard the rumble of motorcycles. 2 Harleys rolled into the station, their chrome gleaming. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the riders, Snake and Razor, faces older but still wearing the colors he'd left behind 40 years ago. Well, look who crawled out of his hole, Snake said, pulling off his helmet. His gray hair was tied back in a ponytail, face lined with age but eyes still cold as ever. Razor, shorter but broader, flanked him like old times. Marcus kept pumping gas, his knuckles white on the handle. Just passing through, he said quietly, hoping to defuse the situation. Snake moved closer, boots scraping on the concrete. That's not what we heard, Bear. Word is you're settling down, playing happy families. He spat on the ground. With that girl you stole from us. Hannah's my daughter, Marcus said, his voice low but firm. Always was. Razor laughed, a harsh sound like gravel in a blender. The club has a long memory, Bear. You turned rat, walked away. Some debts don't expire. Marcus finished pumping gas, carefully replaced the nozzle. Every movement measured, controlled, though his insides were churning. These men knew where to find him. Knew about Hannah, about Lacey. Snake stepped into Marcus's space, close enough that Marcus could smell the stale cigarettes on his breath. Here's how this plays out. You disappear. Take your sorry ass somewhere far away, or we finish what should have been done 40 years ago. His eyes flickered towards the motel across the street. This time, no loose ends. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt the old familiar rage rising, the urge to strike first and hard. But he wasn't that man anymore. He had people counting on him now. You're too old for this game, Snake, Marcus said quietly. We all are. Maybe. Snake's smile didn't reach his eyes. But the younger boys, they're always eager to prove themselves. Be a shame if they found out where that pretty granddaughter of yours spends her nights. Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. Every fiber of his being wanted to put Snake through the nearest wall. But violence would only prove them right, that he was still the same man who'd run with them all those years ago. 24 hours, Razor added, already backing toward his bike. Then we stop being polite about it. The 2 men mounted their motorcycles, the engines roaring to life with a thunderous growl. They peeled out of the station, leaving the scent of exhaust and threat in their wake. Marcus stood there for a long moment, his reflection fractured in the gas pump's scratched metal surface. The peaceful life he'd begun to build felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He got in his truck, hands trembling slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. The drive back to the motel was a blur. He parked in front of his room, staring at the worn door with its peeling paint. Behind it, Hannah and Lacey were probably watching TV, sharing stories, rebuilding their bond. His family, his second chance. How could he protect them from the shadows of his past? The motel room felt smaller than ever as Marcus sat at the cramped desk near the window. His weathered hands trembled as he gripped the cheap ballpoint pen, trying to find the right words. The dim lamp cast yellow shadows across the paper, while Hannah and Lacey slept peacefully in the 2 twin beds behind him. "Dear Lacey and Hannah," he wrote, then stopped. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. How could he explain that leaving them was the only way to keep them safe? He glanced over his shoulder at their sleeping forms. Hannah's face looked younger in sleep, almost like the baby he'd lost so many years ago. Lacey had curled herself into a tight ball, clutching that old teddy bear, with the gang tattoo, the bear that had brought them all together. Marcus turned back to the letter, his pen scratching quietly against the paper. "I know this will hurt you both, but sometimes a man has to make hard choices to protect the people he loves. Those men from my past. They won't stop until they find me. And I can't let them hurt either of you." The sound of passing cars on the highway filtered through the thin motel walls. Each one made him tense, wondering if it was them coming back. He'd seen the cold hatred in their eyes at the gas station. They wouldn't rest until the rat was dealt with. His duffel bag sat ready by the door, containing only what he needed. Some clothes, his wallet, and a few photographs he couldn't bear to leave behind. One showed Lacey bent over a motorcycle engine, her face bright with concentration. Another captured Hannah's smile across a diner table, looking so much like her mother. Marcus pulled out his worn leather wallet and counted out most of his cash, leaving it with the letter. It wasn't much, but it would help them get by until Hannah finished her rehab program. He'd already bought a one-way bus ticket to Seattle, leaving at 4 a.m. Far enough away that his old brothers would follow him instead of staying to hurt his family. The clock read 3:15 a.m. as he carefully folded the letter and placed it on the small table, weighing it down with the money. His chest felt hollow as he picked up his bag, each movement measured and silent. The door's hinges threatened to squeak, but he opened it with the careful precision of a man who'd spent years moving in shadows. At the threshold, he allowed himself one last look. Lacey stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep. Hannah's hand dangled off the edge of her bed, reaching unconsciously toward her daughter. The sight nearly broke his resolve. "I love you both," he whispered, so softly it was barely a breath. Then he closed the door with a gentle click and walked away into the dark, early morning. The bus station was only 6 blocks away. Each step felt like lead, but he forced himself to keep moving. Behind him, in the quiet motel room, his letter waited on the table for Lacey to find when she woke. His last words lay there in stark black ink. "Sometimes love means leaving so others can stay safe. I'll carry you both in my heart forever." Bear. The morning sun cast long shadows across the junkyard as Lacey clutched Marcus's letter in her trembling hand. Her footsteps crunched against broken glass and gravel as she ran through the maze of rusted cars and twisted metal. She knew exactly where to find him. There he sat on that same weathered tire where she'd first appeared to him, a ghost of himself, shoulders hunched under the weight of his decision. His old leather vest lay folded beside him, looking as tired as he did. "Bear," she called out softly, using the nickname that had become so natural these past weeks. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. "You weren't supposed to be up yet. Neither were you." Lacey held up his letter, now crumpled from her grip. "You think leaving is the answer? After everything? It's the only way to keep you and Hannah safe." His voice was rough, like gravel under tires. "Those men, you don't know what they're capable of. And you don't know what I'm capable of surviving." Lacey moved closer, her worn sneakers stopping just inches from his boots. "I've been thrown away before, left behind, forgotten." Her voice cracked. "But you were different." Marcus looked down at his calloused hands. "I'm trying to protect you. By becoming like everyone else who disappeared?" Lacey's words cut through the morning air. "You're not garbage, Bear. You're not something to be thrown away." She knelt down in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You're the first person who ever stayed. The first one who looked at me and saw something worth saving." "Lacey." His voice wavered. "Remember what you told me that first night? About being a family worth fighting for?" She pulled out the drawing she'd made of the teddy bear, the one with Grandpa, written on the back. "Did you mean it?" Marcus's hands shook as he took the drawing. "Every word. Then fight for us now." Tears streamed down Lacey's cheeks. "Stay, please. We just found each other. We just found Mom. Don't let them take that away." Marcus stared at the drawing, then at the junkyard around them. This place of forgotten things that had somehow become the birthplace of something precious. He saw Lacey's face, so much like Hannah's, filled with the same fierce determination he'd once had. "You're not garbage," she repeated, softer this time. "You're my grandfather. You're the man who taught me about engines and hope and not giving up." With a sudden movement, Marcus pulled Lacey into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his tears falling into her hair as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, little one. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that, surrounded by the broken things that had brought them together, their embrace a promise stronger than any written word. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their shoulders, as grandfather and granddaughter held on to what they'd fought so hard to find: each other. The Veterans Hall buzzed with whispers as people filed in, filling the metal folding chairs that faced the simple wooden podium. Marcus stood in the back, his weathered hands trembling as he gripped the edge of his prepared speech. The paper was already wrinkled from how many times he'd folded and unfolded it. Lacey squeezed his arm. "You can do this, Bear." Her eyes shone with pride, making his heart clench. Hannah sat in the front row, her face pale but determined. She'd traded her tattered clothes for a simple blue dress borrowed from the church donation box. The sight of her there, alive and healing, gave Marcus the strength to step forward. Ray introduced him with a simple nod. "Here's Marcus Dalton. He's got something to say." The room fell silent as Marcus approached the podium. His boots echoed on the wooden stage. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he could see familiar faces: shopkeepers who'd given him suspicious looks, churchgoers who crossed the street to avoid him, and in the back corner, 3 leather-clad bikers who'd once ridden with him. He cleared his throat. 40 years ago, I left this town with blood on my hands and darkness in my heart." His voice came out rough but steady. "I was a Hell's Angel. I hurt people. I destroyed lives, and I lost everything that mattered because of it." The silence grew heavier. Marcus set aside his wrinkled paper and spoke from his heart. "My baby girl was taken from me. I deserved it. But she grew up alone, scared, fighting demons no child should face." His eyes found Hannah's. "And her daughter, my granddaughter, ended up in a garbage dump, looking for pieces of herself in other people's throwaway things. He gripped the podium tighter. I found her there, or maybe she found me. This teenage girl who showed me that even broken things, broken people, deserve a second chance. His voice cracked. I've spent decades running from who I was, but that girl in the dump taught me something. She taught me that sometimes you have to stop running and face your garbage. Own it. Clean it up. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks now. I'm standing here today because I'm done hiding. I'm not that man anymore. I'm a father trying to make things right. I'm a grandfather learning to love again. And if you're wondering why I'm telling you all this, he straightened his shoulders. It's because this town is our home now. My daughter Hannah is getting help at the church. My granddaughter Lacey is drawing pictures of motorcycles and dreams. And I'm asking for your acceptance, not for me, but for them. They deserve a chance at peace. Marcus looked directly at the bikers in the back. I know there are those who think I need to pay for my past. Maybe they're right. But I'm not running anymore. I'm standing right here, choosing love over fear, family over revenge. The silence stretched for a long moment after he finished. Then, slowly, people began to stand. First Hannah and Lacey, then Ray, then the pastor from the church. Soon the whole room was on their feet, applauding with tears in their eyes. In the back, the three bikers stood too. The oldest one, a man Marcus had once called brother, gave him a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of respect, of peace. Marcus stepped down from the podium, his legs shaky but his heart lighter than it had been in 40 years. Marcus fidgeted with his tie in the courthouse bathroom mirror. He barely recognized himself in the pressed blue suit Ray had lent him. His weathered hands, still bearing traces of engine grease despite intense scrubbing, smoothed down his freshly trimmed beard. You clean up okay, old man, Ray said, adjusting Marcus's collar. The judge will see what we all see, a man who'd move heaven and earth for that girl. Marcus swallowed hard. What if they dig too deep into my past? Your past is exactly why you're the right person, Ray replied. Who better to guide her than someone who knows the hard road back? In the courtroom, Marcus sat rigid beside his lawyer. Lacey perched next to him in a borrowed dress, her fingers twisting a tissue into confetti. On the video screen, mounted on the wall, Hannah's face beamed from her rehab facility, her eyes bright and clear after 3 months of treatment. The judge, a stern woman with kind eyes, reviewed the thick stack of paperwork. Mr. Dalton, you're petitioning for legal guardianship of your granddaughter, Lacey Taylor. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. And Ms. Hannah Taylor, you support this arrangement while you complete your recovery program? Hannah nodded on screen. Yes, Your Honor. My father. Her voice wavered. He's given me back my life by protecting my daughter when I couldn't. There's no one I trust more. The judge turned to Lacey. And you, young lady, you understand what this means? Lacey sat straighter. It means I get to stay with my grandfather. He found me when I was lost. He showed me I wasn't garbage. She reached for Marcus's hand. He showed me I was family. Marcus squeezed her fingers, fighting back tears. The judge reviewed the social worker's reports, the character references, the progress notes from Hannah's treatment center. Each page turn felt like an eternity. Mr. Dalton, she said finally, your history is complicated. But what I see before me is a man who has worked tirelessly to create a stable home for his granddaughter. Your commitment to both Lacey's welfare and your daughter's recovery is commendable. She lifted her gavel. I hereby grant the petition for legal guardianship. Congratulations. The sharp crack of wood on wood echoed through the courtroom. Marcus barely heard it over the pounding of his heart. Lacey threw her arms around his neck, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Hannah wiped tears from her eyes on the video screen. "I love you both so much," she whispered. Outside on the courthouse steps, the Montana sun warm on their faces, Marcus reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a small key attached to a leather fob with a hand-tooled L. Kneeling before Lacey, he held it out. "For when you're ready," he said softly. "That old Sportster we've been fixing up, she's yours now." The old junkyard transformed over 3 months of hard work. Marcus and Ray spent weekends clearing decades of rust and debris, making space for something new. Where piles of broken cars once rotted, neat rows of workbenches now gleamed under fresh fluorescent lights. Tools hung in organized patterns on freshly painted walls, and the concrete floor shone with a new seal. "Pass me that wrench," Marcus called to Ray as he tightened the last bolt on a hydraulic lift. Sweat dripped from his gray beard, despite the cool morning air. "Can't believe we pulled this off." Ray chuckled, handing over the tool. "Place hasn't looked this good since I bought it 30 years ago." Through the wide garage doors, morning sunlight spilled across 3 project motorcycles positioned in the center of the shop. Each bike represented a different challenge. One needed engine work, another required electrical repairs, and the third was just a frame waiting to be rebuilt from scratch. At 9 o'clock, they heard the first nervous footsteps. 3 teenagers shuffled in, followed by their social worker. They wore the familiar look of kids who'd seen too much too young, the same look Marcus had first seen in Lacey's eyes. "Welcome to your first day," Marcus said, his gruff voice gentler than usual. "I'm Marcus. This is Ray." He gestured to Lacey, who stepped forward wearing fresh overalls with "Instructor" stitched on the pocket. "And this is my granddaughter, Lacey. She'll be teaching you everything she knows about engines." The teens stared at Lacey with surprise. She was barely older than them, but her confidence was evident as she approached the first motorcycle. "This is a '85 Honda Shadow," she said, patting the gas tank. "When I started, I didn't know a spark plug from a soup can, but my grandfather taught me something important. Broken things aren't worthless. They just need someone to believe in them." One boy, hood pulled low over his eyes, scoffed. "It's just junk." Lacey smiled, remembering her own words from months ago. "Maybe, but wait until you hear it run." She handed him a wrench. "Want to help me prove it?" Over the next hour, Lacey guided them through basic engine parts. Her patience matched Marcus's when he'd first taught her. She knew when to encourage, when to demonstrate, and when to step back and let them figure things out themselves. Marcus watched from his workbench, pride swelling in his chest. Ray nudged him with an elbow. "She's a natural teacher," Ray whispered. "She is," Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. By lunch, the teens had forgotten their initial reluctance. They huddled around the Honda's engine, hands dirty, asking questions faster than Lacey could answer them. Even the boy with the hood had pushed it back, revealing eager eyes as Lacey explained the timing chain. At 2 o'clock, a delivery truck pulled up outside. 2 workers carefully unloaded a large metal sign, its surface covered by a tarp. Marcus gathered everyone in front of the building. "This place isn't just about fixing bikes," he said, gripping the tarp. "It's about fixing lives, about second chances and fresh starts." He pulled the cover away. The sign gleamed in the afternoon sun. Lacey's hope, repair, and recovery. Below the text was a simple drawing of a teddy bear holding a wrench. Lacey gasped, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes filled with tears as she read the name. Her name, shining above the garage where she'd first found her family. The morning light filtered through frosted windows, casting a gentle glow on the small Christmas tree in the corner of Marcus's living room. Lacey stood on tiptoes, carefully hanging a string of paper snowflakes she had crafted herself. Each one told a story, some cut from old maintenance manuals, others from church bulletins where Hannah now worked. "These pancakes aren't getting any prettier," Marcus called from the kitchen, his gruff voice tinged with frustration. The smell of slightly burnt batter wafted through the air. Lacey glanced over her shoulder, trying not to laugh. "Bear, you know you can flip them before they turn black, right?" "Smart Alec," he muttered, but his eyes crinkled with affection. He scraped another charred circle onto a growing stack. "Your grandmother used to say I could burn water." "Did she?" Lacey carefully hung a tiny wrench ornament she'd welded herself. The tree was unlike any other, decorated with small metal sculptures she'd made from spare parts, each one catching the morning light. "Yeah," Marcus's voice softened. "She loved Christmas. Would have loved seeing you doing this." The sound of crunching gravel outside made them both look up. Through the window, they saw Hannah's small car pull up. She stepped out wearing a red sweater, her face healthy and glowing, so different from the haunted woman they'd found months ago. Lacey's hands trembled as she set down the last ornament. Even now, seeing her mother healthy and present felt like a dream she might wake up from. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold Montana air. Hannah stood there, arms full of clumsily wrapped packages, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "Merry Christmas," she whispered. Lacey moved first, wrapping her arms around her mother, careful not to knock the presents loose. Hannah's familiar lavender scent, no longer masked by illness or fear, enveloped her. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron, looking uncertain until Hannah reached out one arm to include him. They stood there, 3 generations holding each other, until the smell of burning batter made Marcus curse. "Oh, Lord, the pancakes," Hannah laughed, a clear, bell-like sound that seemed to wash away the last shadows in the room. "Some things never change, Dad." They settled around the small table, passing slightly crispy pancakes and sharing knowing looks. Hannah had brought real maple syrup, and somehow even the burnt edges tasted perfect. "Time for presents?" Lacey asked, trying to contain her excitement. They gathered near the tree. Hannah went first, handing them each carefully wrapped packages. Inside Marcus's was a leather wallet, hand-tooled with a bear design. "From my leatherworking class at the recovery center," she explained softly. Lacey opened hers to find a journal, its cover decorated with pressed flowers. "For all your design ideas," Hannah said. "I pressed each flower myself." Marcus cleared his throat, clearly emotional, and handed them his gifts. For Hannah, a delicate silver chain with her birthstone. For Lacey, a small toolbox filled with her own set of carefully restored vintage tools. Lacey's gifts were last, drawings she'd done of each of them. Hannah's showed her standing proud in her church volunteer vest. Marcus's captured him bent over a motorcycle, his face peaceful in concentration. Their laughter filled the small room as they shared stories about making each gift. Hannah told them about pressing flowers in the recovery center's garden. Marcus admitted to spending weeks hunting down the perfect vintage tools. Lacey described sketching them when they weren't looking. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the metal ornaments and sending sparkles dancing across their faces as they sat together. A family pieced back together with love, forgiveness, and hope. The morning dew still clung to the motorcycle's chrome when Marcus pulled the tarp off his secret project. The rebuilt 3-seater sidecar bike gleamed in the early spring sunshine, its dark blue paint catching the light like a mirror. He'd worked on it for months in the garage, after hours, long after Lacey had gone to bed. "Is that what I think it is?" Hannah stepped forward, running her fingers along the polished handlebars. Her eyes sparkled with tears. Marcus nodded, his weathered face breaking into a rare, full smile. Your mother's favorite. Found one just like it and fixed it up. Lacey circled the motorcycle, studying every detail with the sharp eye she'd developed working in the shop. This is amazing, Bear. She touched the leather seat reverently. Did you do the stitching yourself? Sure did. Ray helped me track down the original pattern. Marcus pulled 3 helmets from behind his back. Who's up for a ride? Hannah hesitated for just a moment before taking the helmet he offered. It's been so long. Don't worry, Marcus said softly. I'll take it easy. The engine purred to life under Marcus's experienced touch. Hannah settled behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist like she used to do as a little girl. Lacey tucked herself into the sidecar, grinning from ear to ear. They cruised out of town as the sun climbed higher, warming the crisp spring air. Cherry blossoms drifted across their path like snow, and the mountains stood sharp and clear against the blue sky. Marcus guided them down winding back roads he remembered from decades ago, roads that hadn't changed much since he'd last ridden them. Hannah's grip gradually relaxed as they rode, and soon she was laughing into the wind. Lacey kept pointing at things they passed. A hawk soaring overhead, a deer watching from the tree line, wildflowers painting entire hillsides in brilliant colors. They rode past old barns and newer houses, through patches of shadow and light under budding trees. The motorcycle's steady rumble seemed to sync with their heartbeats, binding them together in a way words never could. After about an hour, Marcus turned onto a narrow dirt road that climbed steadily upward. It ended at a lookout point that opened up to the whole valley below. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt sacred. They stood at the railing, taking in the view. The town looked tiny from up here, nestled in its bowl of mountains like a precious stone. The spring sunlight caught every window and metal surface, making the whole scene sparkle. I used to come up here to think, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, about where you might be, Hannah, about what I'd lost. Hannah slipped her hand into his. And now here we are. Lacey moved closer to them both, her eyes bright. This was the best day of my life. Marcus squeezed Hannah's hand and put his other arm around Lacey's shoulders. His voice was barely more than a whisper. Mine too. Lacey stood at the podium in the high school auditorium, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of her note cards. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and rows of students and parents filled the seats before her. In the front row, Marcus sat straight-backed in his cleanest denim jacket, while Hannah, wearing a modest sundress, clutched his weathered hand. 3 years ago, Lacey began, her voice soft but steady. There was a girl who lived in the garbage dump behind Ray's Auto Salvage. She paused, watching as a few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She wasn't there because she had nowhere else to go, not really. She was there because she believed that's where she belonged. The room fell silent. Even the usual whispers and rustling of papers stilled. This girl would sit on old tires and dig through rusty lockers, searching for pieces of herself in other people's throwaway things. Lacey's fingers brushed the small teddy bear pin on her collar, a gift from Marcus. She thought if enough people had thrown her away, maybe that's all she was meant to be. Garbage. In the front row, Hannah wiped a tear from her cheek. Marcus wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his eyes never leaving his granddaughter. But then something happened, Lacey continued, her voice growing stronger. An old biker, a man who most people crossed the street to avoid, he saw her, really saw her. She smiled at Marcus, whose gruff exterior couldn't hide the pride shining in his eyes. He showed her that broken things aren't worthless, that sometimes the most beautiful stories start in the darkest places. She pulled out the worn teddy bear from her backpack, the one with the sewn-in tattoo that had started it all. This bear led me to my grandfather, and through him, I found my mother again. Lacey held the bear close to her heart. Some people might call it coincidence. I call it a miracle. The silence in the auditorium deepened as Lacey shared how Marcus had taught her to fix motorcycles, how Hannah had fought her way back from addiction, how they'd built a family from the scattered pieces of their broken past. That garbage dump girl thought she was searching through trash. Lacey's voice cracked slightly. But she was really searching for love, for belonging, for hope. She straightened her shoulders. And she found it all in the most unexpected place, with a retired Hell's Angel who taught her that everyone deserves a second chance. The audience began to stir, several people dabbing at their eyes. Marcus sat rigid, trying to maintain his tough exterior, but his trembling chin betrayed him. Today that dump is Lacey's hope, a place where other lost kids learn to rebuild engines and rebuild their lives. She gestured to several teenagers in the audience wearing the shop's logo shirts. Because sometimes the things, and the people, that others throw away turn out to be the most precious of all. As applause filled the auditorium, Lacey stepped down from the podium. Marcus and Hannah rose to their feet, clapping the loudest, their faces beaming with pride and love. She walked to them, wrapped in their embrace, feeling the strength of their unity. Looking up at them both, her voice barely above a whisper, Lacey said, "I'm not that girl anymore. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you're watching from. Have a wonderful day."